Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update. It's actually my third video today. I feel like I could do a 24-hour news-a-thon today. So much to talk about. The world is nuts at the moment, and there's a lot concerning Ukraine going on. For example, that which is coming out about the American demands for the peace plan for Ukraine, peace plan, scare quotes, and the demands that they have access to $200 billion of frozen Russian assets to invest themselves. And then the Russians, with this gray zone, Russians not having to kind of leave the gray zone or not have to pull their troops back, but the Ukrainians having to do that themselves, and all sorts of crazy things that you're like, really? Oh my goodness. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to be talking about Pokrovsk, about the massive losses that appear to be taking place there for the Russians, but it's just ongoing, and the Ukrainians are struggling to just hold back the waves there, it seems. We're going to talk about the incredible news of first of all, a tanker being struck yesterday by unmanned surface vehicles in the Black Sea, but also an oil rig in the Caspian Sea being taken out, and a huge drone and potentially missile strike last night from the Ukrainians, maybe as many as 400 drones being sent into Russia. And we are starting to hear some information about that, but actually relatively little information considering the sheer volume of weapons thrown into Russian airspace. So lots to talk about. Let's start with, well, of course, my obligatory request that if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do so, and keep yourself ahead of what's going on in Ukraine, but also around the world. Thank you to all those who already have done. Right, let's get into the details. We start with, no, we don't, because I haven't even got the screen up. We start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them in the description to the video below. We have a significant day, and this has to be reflective of what is going on in Pokrovsk. It just has to be. We hear that the Ukrainians have pushed back the Russians, maybe in the north of Pokrovsk. I don't know if that's true, but what is certainly true is that the Russians are taking stupendous casualties in Pokrovsk. Whether that is changing their tactics in any way, shape, or form is another question entirely. But 1,460 personnel lost is the highest I've seen for months and months. That is really significant. 7 armored combat vehicles, no tanks. 23 artillery systems, that's fairly decent in that category. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 157 vehicles and fuel tanks. So those two figures, the personnel and vehicles, often signify to me that the Russians are attacking and they're getting quite a beating. But of course, as we know, that the Russians can attack with 100 people as long as 5 get through, and then another 100, another 5 get through, another 100, another 5 get through, and suddenly you've got 15 people in a building or a tree line or whatever. You understand the ratios there, you know, pulling those numbers out my backside. But the point is that they can afford to lose that many in order to try and take this building, that tree line, this trench. And so they just grind on and grind on. But the casualty numbers are absolutely extraordinary. 3 pieces of special equipment as well. A low number of drones there, which is an interesting stat and good news for the Ukrainians. Right, so really, I think very positive news for the Ukrainians. They are doing a really good job. But of course, that also means that the Russians are massively attacking, one would have thought, or certainly, you know, very active. I would suggest Kupiansk and Seversk and Pokrovsk, obviously, and then maybe down Halypole direction, Ivanivka, maybe a little bit between Halypole on the southern front line, or that kind of corner bit, or what used to be a corner, and Pokrovsk. So all sorts of different places, potential for Russian attacks. Now, Russia is preparing for a mobilization of reservists, according to the Institute for the Study of War. They say that Putin has created a new decree that allows for the conscription of an unlimited number of reservists into the army for 2026. Now, this is deeply worrying for Ukraine, obviously, but it's also indicative of problems for Russia. There's no doubt about that. No clear rules have been established regarding the participation of these conscripted reservists in combat operations, says Max 25. Such a step provides an opportunity to quietly attract its strategic reserve and reduce military spending. So there could be a couple of advantages to why they are pulling on reservists and not new combatants or new recruits. But I would suggest that things are probably very desperate for the Russians. They need not to be seen to be sort of collapsing on the front line or having real problems, because they're at this very critical moment where they think they've got the US administration in their pockets, that the Trump administration is acting on their behalf in these negotiations against Europe and Ukraine. And if they can keep showing that they are grinding on and taking this land, then they can say to the US, look, we are grinding on, we're taking this land, but Ukrainians are losing. Therefore, they have no ability to, affect the front lines. They have no ability, they have no leverage in this war. But of course, what Ukraine is trying to do is slam their missiles and drones into Russia, take out their hydrocarbon facilities, put their own sanctions on the Russian economy. Meanwhile, Europe and to some degree the US are still sanctioning Russia, and then the Ukrainians hope that Russia will kind of fall apart from that side of things. The problem is for Ukraine is that they want to shout about this, I guess, to the world, but it's very difficult, I think, for footage to come out from Russia to show that success. So last night, huge set of drones and missiles being sent into Russia, relatively small amounts of footage coming out, and that makes it, I guess, somewhat difficult for the Ukrainians to say, look how well we're doing in smacking the Russians about in their own country. And meanwhile, the Russians can say, look, we have taken this territory, we've got a flag up in this village and a flag up there, look at this map, which will obviously be a very pro-Russian map, and they'll show that to the Americans, so on and so forth. So there's a fight on for the narrative here, but the Russians are definitely struggling, I think, in terms of numbers on the front line. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of different views of what's going on in the Pokrovsk area, particularly. This is 414 Magyar's Birds, the kind of official account on Twitter for Robert Brovdy and his lot. Very well worth following. They say in the past 24 hours, shortened by thick fog. So that's another thing to also mention, is that snow and fog is fairly heavy in Ukraine at the moment. There's a lot of activity going on. The Russians are going to be attacking, hopefully for them, they would think, hopefully under the disguise of fog and poor weather that should stop a lot of drone activity. But actually the Ukrainians are still trying to hammer those Russian advances even in fog and inclement weather. So anyway, in the past 24 hours, shortened by thick fog, turned into a record day of worm disposal by the USF Birds, the Unmanned System Forces Birds. 471 yobliks pecked in one day. But something tells us this record won't stand for long. The horde keeps pushing, and by dawn, the first 100 had already splashed red on white. USF Birds were deep in the swamps today, running a separate big bada-bomb beat, heavy, broken rhythms full of samples and bass. Typical Robert Brovdy statement here, especially if you've seen any of his videos and the kind of sound effects he does and whatnot. Okay, so the claim here is that the unmanned systems forces have had a record day of Russian losses, and I don't know if this is specific to Pokrovsk or just generally, and that they're also trying to do other things, but also that the record day yesterday, and then already by the time they have posted this at 6:42 my time, which would be 8:42 in the morning Ukrainian time, they've already killed 100, or there are 100 serious casualties as a result of their activity this morning. So these guys are absolutely, I would say, killing it. I guess that's a pun intended. But on the other hand, the sheer weight of Russian forces is really potentially unmanageable for the Ukrainians. So then we'll move on to this. So a few things to say, actually. No, I'm going to. So this was out of position. That Robert Property post was out of position. Anton Gerashenko here says, I've repeatedly emphasized the danger of further Russian occupation of Ukraine because it would mean that Russia, preparing for a future war in Europe, would gain not only Ukrainian infrastructure, but also additional mobilization potential, Ukrainians who know how to fight. This is a problem that has been stated before. So one argument I've often provided is that Russia would just not be able to have the manpower, the equipment to move on. If they took Ukraine or large parts of Ukraine, they would be unable to then carry on into Europe because they would have just exhausted themselves. But the theory is that actually, like any invading army that takes massive territory, they would just pick up they would mobilize troops from their captured territories, and these troops would effectively initially have to fight against their own fellow countrymen and then be sent abroad to fight on behalf of Russia against Latvia or whatever. So you've got this guy here. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians, says Gerashenko, from territories occupied by Russia have been mobilized and forced by the Russian occupation authorities to fight against their own country. Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, 46,327 Ukrainian citizens from temporarily occupied territories have been mobilized into the Russian army. The overwhelming majority of them are residents of Crimea. And I talked about this previously. Here's an example, the story of a 26-year-old Ukrainian Pavlo Pschenichny. He served in the anti-terrorist operations zone, where he sustained a severe injury in 2019. After treatment, Pavlo settled in the village of Kalanchak on the left bank of the Kherson region. On February the 24th, 2022, the village was occupied by Russian forces. He ended up in the Russian army after being told he was facing a 12-year prison sentence. He wanted to serve the sentence, but Russians told him that prison would be the army, and according to Pavlo, he had no other choice. In the summer of 2025, he was captured by Ukrainian forces. I mean, goodness me, what a messed up head he must have. Anyway, just before we get back to, so sorry, that was out of position. Just before we get back to Pokrovsk, I also want to say that there were 7 servicemen on the AN-22 that crashes, cargo plane that crashed in a reservoir in the Ivanova region that I reported yesterday morning. It turns out, was it the day before, I think. It turns out that there are actually 8 people who died on the plane. Tim White says all 8 were very experienced and will weaken Russia's air force. That was when a plane that probably should have been decommissioned, I think all the other ones, I think it was the last operating AN-22, that went wrong and crashed into the reservoir. It was reported that 7 had died, but actually 8, and they all seem to be, I guess, fairly experienced crew members given their ages and whatnot. But anyway, that was that. We're going to move back to Pokrovsk. Sorry to get the order all messed up here. So this is, I said I'd give you a number of different sort of views. This is Rob Lee apparently talking or getting a quote here from Pravda talking to Marines in the area of Pokrovsk. Quote from a Marine officer, quote, "The enclosed grey zone around Myrnograd, shown today by Deep State, has effectively existed for several weeks. The last time we rotated personnel using vehicles was in mid-November. And then in early December, a handful of people managed to get out on foot, and that's all. In November, there was another attempt through Rudinsky, so that's a town to the north, but all 3 vehicles, ours and those of neighbouring units, were destroyed. Now, I understand why Pokrovsk fell so quickly, because we are facing the same situation. There comes a point when the enemy troops achieve critical mass, and that's it. They're everywhere, and it's impossible to stop that, because before that, they wipe out logistics and drone units and push back our artillery." Details. With the road to Myrnograd through Pokrovsk no longer accessible, as Pokrovsk is largely under Russian occupation, Ukrainian units are forced to use routes through 2 tiny villages, Rivne and Svitle. Part of Rivne is under Russian control, and Russia's Ministry of Defense has released footage showing their troops there. As a result, the corridor for withdrawal from the city has become even more dangerous. Overall, the corridor out of Myrnograd consists of a few kilometers of grey zone, even between partially occupied Rivne and a fully occupied village of Chervony Liman. Rodinsky, north of Chervony Liman, is approximately 80% under Russian control. A movement through this corridor has been dangerous for at least the past 3 or 4 weeks. Ukrainian brigades are suffering losses while attempting to move through it. The Russians are literally everywhere. Brigades from Ukraine's air assault forces have tried to clear the corridor, but there is currently no information on the outcome of these efforts. Meanwhile, as Russian troops attempt to cut off the approach roads to Myrnarad, they're also increasing their presence inside the city itself. The exact number of their forces cannot be determined, as Ukrainian troops now have increasingly limited surveillance capability. Soldiers told Ukrainska Pravda that some districts of Myrnarad were close to being encircled. Right, so the idea here is that Russians are committing huge numbers to this area. The Ukrainians are under immense pressure. Myrnarad is effectively encircled. I mean, to get out there is so damned risky. Dimko Zhluktenko replies to this Rob Lee excerpt saying, and I've interviewed him a number of times, met him in Lviv as well. He says there, and he's a drone pilot now or has been for some time, in the Donetsk region. He said there's just way too many Russian soldiers there. They run at you non-stop. Some of my brothers in arms describe this as Bakhmut all over again in terms of manpower Russians are willing to sacrifice for the city of Pokrovsk. So then we go back to these huge numbers being lost, including unarmored vehicles. And Robert Brovdy saying, we are taking out like stupendous numbers of troops here in the past 24 hours, and including this morning, we have taken, massive numbers of Russian casualties. But the flip side is that those Russians are effectively encircling the people in Pokrovsk and particularly Myrnarad. It's virtually impossible to rotate and to supply and to get out. And all the Ukrainians appear to be doing at the moment is holding back the tide just about, but holding back the tide is taking a huge toll on Russian numbers, just huge numbers. Here we have a video, Pokrovsk. Russians are calling in reserves. So another wave of soldiers has rolled into the city on ATVs and infantry. One good shot and minus 10 Russians and a few ATVs. Pokrovsk is holding, says Kiriyenko. So it's holding. Russians are throwing in huge numbers of reserves. They absolutely want to take this. The video footage, there's quite a bit of evidence at the moment of stuff that is taking place. And it is, a lot of destruction, a lot of Russian troop losses, but they are losing an awful lot, the Russians. But how long can the Ukrainians hold out against these just consistent waves of Russian attacks? Ooh. There you can see unarmored vehicles. These are quads, things on fire there. This is taken from one angle, and I'm wondering if another bit of footage we have, just that I'll show you in a second, is of that same area, just from a different kind of angle. Here, yeah, so the same video here. Russia is throwing in reserves. Another assault wave has hit the city, including infantry on quad bikes. One well-aimed strike took out 10 occupiers and several vehicles. Ukraine's forces are still present within the city limits. And then the one I was just referencing is this one. Oh, no, it's not this one, but we'll come to that. Sorry, there's so much data at the moment. Okay, this is it. So this is a drone, and I don't know whether it's going down that same road you were just looking at. Additional footage of the repelling of today's Russian mechanized assaults on the Pokrovsk, in the Pokrovsk direction. So apparently this was coming up from the south. There's almost certainly music here. So you can see just huge craters there. You got burning equipment. It looks mainly like unarmored vehicle. Now, this is a little bit later on because of course, if this is the same footage that we saw, it was explosion just off by here that caught fire to some of these vehicles at the front. And then in this video, you can see actually there's two sets of vehicles. A lot of destruction going on there. So we go back to this, if it's the same, and I don't know if it is, you've got a set of vehicles here and a set of vehicles there, and these are the ones that are on fire in the video you're looking at right now at the front. But then there was a massive, is that massive crater just back here? There's a bit of a watermark right in the way. That could be that huge crater it goes over. That these vehicles are then on fire. Then it gets to these vehicles here, which are on fire at the beginning of at the end of this video, and then there were supposedly 10 troops. I mean, that you saw the 10 troops walking then, but I don't know, what their eventual fate was. So if we go back to this video and take it back to the beginning, I presume it's the same bit of road here, and we have a crater followed by some burning bits of kit here, and then these other bits of kit. Oh, is that some kind of cut there? I don't know. Anyway, just a lot of burning equipment and destruction there. And then this video sort of carries on a little bit, but yeah, just inordinate amounts of kit being taken out, and just that small bit of road. Well, not inordinate, and you can count them, but the Ukrainians do an effective job there. Now, fighting in the Pokrovsk area, which the Russian occupiers have already claimed as their own 3 times. So remember, the Russians have claimed that they have taken Pokrovsk a number of times, and it's clearly not reality. How many people came here is a question. 20, all dead, guys. You shot everyone. One of the episodes of a gun battle with an enemy assault group. So this is, one of many sort of bits of footage you can see. A guy with an ATGM, by the looks of it here, coming out and having a pop. You've got someone lying on the ground with a heavy machine gun, taking out Russians, and I'm not playing you the sounds because I'll get into trouble. But essentially, the claim is that they've taken everyone out here. I think they took out 20 and 1 surrendered here in this. One of the episodes of gun battle with an enemy assault group. The enemy group was almost completely destroyed. The surviving soldiers surrendered. Footage of the 132nd separate reconnaissance battalion there. So he's firing off an ATGM. So that is happening in the Pokrovsk area. The Pokrovsk supposedly they have completely lost. So Euromaidan Press does their daily synopsis, actually looks at reporting from Ukraine's videos and then puts up a transcript basically of those. So this is really reporting from Ukraine, and I presume that this short paragraph is referring to an RFU video. That's certainly an RFU infographic there. Russian command's new strategy near Pokrovsk: feed hundreds of troops daily into Ukrainian drone fire just to hold the line. The logic: as long as the bodies keep coming, Ukraine can't redeploy forces for offensive action elsewhere. So this is about keeping the Ukrainians pinned into Pokrovsk, making sure that they are having to divert huge amounts of troops relative to the size of their army to try and keep the neck of the cauldron open. This is, Myrnihrad's down here. They are kind of stuck here, with supposedly this actually being a much thinner neck and all grey zone, and Rodinska up here being one of the ways out, but it's largely under Russian control, so it's all very difficult getting out of this pocket. And if the Russians keep throwing their troops into there, particularly up to in this direction, Dobropili direction, this was the bunny ears at the top here. The Russians throwing their troops into this top area to try and encircle the whole Pokrovsk-Myrnihrad region, while fixing the Ukrainian troops in by also sending troops into the south here. Then that appears to be plausibly their tactic at the moment. Now, the enemy does not give up attempts to capture Ivanivka. Ivanivka is further to the south now, settlement on the border of Dnipropetrovsk and Donetsk regions. Today, Marines of the 2nd Battalion of the 37th Brigade captured 10 occupiers and eliminated 5 more, and which is good news. So the Ukrainians countering there. These are these kind of mini counterattacks where they, signified by taking prisoners. If you take prisoners, it means you're attacking, right? You're very rarely going to be taking prisoners when you're defending. So that's good news for the Ukrainians there, I guess. Units of Ukraine's 7th Rapid Reaction Corps, and you can see the weather here, and this is why it's been quite difficult for drones to be as effective as possible. And yet Magyar is still saying, and we've had a record day, so drones are evidently still active and doing their thing. But yeah, the 68th Jaeger Brigade successfully repelled a large Russian mechanized assault near Pokrovsk using FPV drones, artillery, and ground fire. Ukrainian forces destroyed armored vehicles, trucks, and motorcycles advancing under poor weather cover. So this is an extended war, like a montage version. It includes stuff that we've already seen just now, but with more footage in it too. So yeah, just a lot, as I say, a lot of footage coming out just now. Okay. Okay, moving on to sort of drones here. This is a Baba Yaga style drone, I believe, a heavy bomber drone. You can't really see it very easy because it's under a, a pixelated area here. But what's going on? So Ukrainians have deployed in this year, in 2025, a heavy drone LED, a lay light, to blind the optical sensors of Russian FPV drones rather than a Nazi submarine. So obviously that's something they used previously on for Nazi submarines. There you go. That's a World War II reference. But anyway, what the Ukrainians are doing, this is Roy, a Canadian source, a Ukraine heavy drone under attack from a Russian FPV emits, and it's here, so you can't quite see, you can see the bottom of the drone just there, but it's covered by this pixelated rectangle. The FPV video camera is temporarily blinded as it emits a bright flash of light, and the operator loses track of the target, and heavy drone is near the top of the screen under the static rectangle. Whether it fully gets away, I don't know. But this is a new tactic, and we'll just see it here. So there's your bomber drone, the FPV drone coming in to take it out. Now, the bomber drone obviously recognizes that the FPV drone's coming, emits that massive flash of light, and then when it gets back its visuals, the bomber drone has got out of dodge. I presumed upwards. There's probably the safest option for it. Go up above this drone, which is broadly looking down, and then get out of there. So interesting tactic there, developed by those Ukrainians. Okay, what else do we have? Now, I don't know that this is new footage. You quite often see stuff like this, and I'm fairly sure I've seen this footage previously. But anyway, a number of people showing this on the Zaporizhzhia front. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Sabotage Unit has struck again 2 high-value Russian radars, the 1L125 Niobe SV and a 9A83 launcher from the S300V air defense system were taken out. Additional Russian equipment was also hit. So bear in mind, this might be recycled footage from recent kind of primary looking attacks like that one and that one. So those are the 2 ones. It's just in this montage of quite a lot of equipment being hit. And it could be that that's new radar equipment and an S300 launcher. And if that's the case, then that is fantastic. But anyway, that montage very quickly showing a couple of key bits of equipment there, including air defense, really high value air defense kits. Now, moving on to one of the headline topics here, Ukraine has attacked another Russian oil tanker in the Black Sea with naval drones. This is Rebar. This has been a long time since I've referred to Rebar. I used to refer to them quite a lot. A very Russian source. They've just been sanctioned by the UK, actually, Rebar, I believe, along with Alexander Dugin, finally. The attack took place a few hours ago. Well, actually, this is yesterday now. 3 drones hit the Gambian-flagged tanker Dashan. The vessel is under sanctions as part of the Russian Shadow Fleet. You can see its position there on the map, south of Feodosia there. So the Ukrainian drones having to come quite a long way, but of course they're used to going to places like Novorossiysk. This ship was on the way to Novorossiysk, the implication being it was empty and it's going to get refilled. A group of naval drones moved out from the Odessa region at night and headed towards the eastern part of the Black Sea, bypassing the Crimean Peninsula. During the attack on the tanker, a British RC-135W reconnaissance aircraft was operating in the air in the western Black Sea. So that is this purple line there. I've said to you before, I was watching a British Channel 4 documentary on the Air Force, and I think it's called Top Guns or something like that. And series 2, they were featuring a lot of activity around Crimea with our radar planes going very, very close to Crimea. I couldn't believe how close they actually got to Crimea, escorted by jets before the Eurofighter Typhoons, before the Russians would trying to shoo them away. It's pretty risky stuff. So anyway, let's go back to this ship then. So this is the footage coming out of the Dashan after it was attacked by naval kamikaze drones. The Dashan IMO 92 blah, 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 blah in the Black Sea, heading for Novorossiysk. Let's turn off the music, of course. So you can see these I say these because there's more than one of them. You'll see this explosion that happens now from a distance in a second. and I don't know what damage these can do to the hull, how much they can penetrate, if at all. But you know, probably got double skinned and everything like that. I'm no ship expert, but you see the large explosion from that previous part of the clip going for the rudder, the stern of the vessel here, for obvious reasons. You take out, you know, all the rest of the hull is, you know, solid metal. You've got some moving parts here, and this is going to be your weakness. You take out the hull, the rudder, and the ship, you know, struggles to be effective. So yeah, you can see. I don't know if that's an example of a blackened hull from previous strike, but there you got fairly substantial explosion. You got another drone going towards it as well. So I'm guessing you probably got at least 4 explosions taking place, I assume, in the same area of this ship. Uh, Maybe each subsequent one weakening the hull more and more, certainly taking out its steering capability. So, Sea Baby drones are the Ukrainians' SBU struck a Russian Shadow Fleet tanker, the Dashan ship under the Comoros flag. Actually, it says here was moving towards Novorossiysk with the transponder turned off, unsurprisingly. Inside Ukraine's exclusive economic zone, the joint SPU and Navy operation reportedly disabled the vessel. So that has been disabled, rather than sunk. You know, that prevents an environmental disaster. I think that's probably a really sensible thing, is just take out the rudder. So basically, any ship that comes in and tries to allow Russia to make money through the transport of hydrocarbons, we're not going to sink you. You'll assume that your crew will be safe enough, but we will take out the ship's ability to steer and therefore be able to be used for the purpose of shipping Russia's hydrocarbons and making Russian money. Now, yesterday in St. Petersburg, a huge fire took place. Russia on fire. I don't know how it started, but a man's body has been found in the ruins of the St. Petersburg market. Storeholders and other business owners accounting the cost. Locals say it completely burned down in just 2 hours. It's a phenomenally sized fire there. Well, it's just a fairly large market, isn't it? But when I show you the next footage, I mean, wow, pretty roaring fire, should we say. Now, I don't know if that has anything at all to do with the war, but there have been so many of these sorts of fires over the course of the war that I think are anomalous, as in, you know, statistically speaking, Russia has had, and in fact, speaking of Rebar, this is back in just after a year into the war, I think, probably a year and a half into the war. They did an analysis of all the fires that have been in Russia since the war begun, and they admitted that there was anomalous numbers of fires, and that they were also significant in terms of the sorts of things that were burning. So it wasn't always things like, you know, a marketplace like this, but actually, you know, areas that could be connected to the war more explicitly, I think. But anyway, huge fire there. Yeah, that's one of the markets in St. Petersburg going up. Now, I need to find you the rest of the details here. Hang on. So here it is. So an explosion of a hydrodynamic stand occurred in a laboratory of Perm Polytechnic University. As a result of the incident, 4 people were injured, 2 of whom died. Information is being clarified. Max 25 came out early this morning. And I was thinking, should I bother telling you that? And I was like, no, I mean, who knows what that is, what that pertains to. And then he's just come out and said, it turns out that the director of the Perm plant, Ankos, which manufactures equipment for the oil and gas industry, died during equipment testing. So that's potentially far more significant. According to Ural Mash, the man who died at the Perm Polytechnic Institute with his daughter was the director of the Ankos plant. During preliminary testing of the new installation, a turbine wheel shattered inside it, and the fragments pierced protective structures and struck people. So yeah, that might have an effect on, I guess, the oil and gas industry, with a CEO there, or the director of one big company, and his daughter getting taken out. Right. Okay, on to distant strikes. I know we're already 34 minutes through this, and we're not even on to the second section yet. It's a crazy day. So then we come on to, well, first of all, the Russians striking on Ukraine. Last night was one of the biggest potential waves of attacks on Russia from Ukraine. But we'll start with the Russians. They had 54 missiles and drones, 151 drones, 3 Iskander-M ballistic missiles. 2 out of the 3 were intercepted, so that's good news. And then 83 out of the 151 drones were taken out. Now, that is another very poor interception rate night. I don't know where these drones were targeting, but that is, yeah, almost 70 drones getting through. That's 68 drones getting through out of 151. So that is, what's that going to be? Somewhere maybe in the late 50s, 60% of drones intercepted there. I think that's a poor interception rate. And it turns out that many of them were being sent at Kremenchuk. Kremenchuk seems to have been targeted a huge number of times recently. Overnight, Kremenchuk was hit by a drone and missile attacks, damaging energy infrastructure. Poltava administration reports. I don't know what it is in Kremenchuk. I guess it's close enough to the entire front line to be a fairly sensible place to stage, to have lots of military equipment and personnel for rotation purposes, and it's sort of far enough away, but actually it's getting completely hammered by the Russians on a really consistent basis. You got Odessa here as well being targeted, and some places nearer the front line, probably Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, that kind of area, I think. Yeah, so really heavy night for Kremenchuk particularly. We have footage here of a P1 Sun drone, an interceptor drone. The first, oh, it's not the first, because I think I'm sure I've talked about the P1 Sun before. Some of the first footage of a Ukrainian interceptor drone, the P1 Sun, destroying a Russian Shahed drone there. So that's good news. New drones coming out all the time. Annoying when there is evidence of this, although good that the Ukrainians are onto it. This is a 21-year-old lad, 21-year-old man, gave a representative of Russia data on the location of military units and the thermal power plants in Kiev. A traitor from the Khmelnytsky region passed on all the information about the location of objects needed by Russia to one of the employees of the Russian Special Services. The guy here was detained right near the thermal power plant, which he was filming on behalf of the Russians. After his detention, he also asked to be included in the lists for exchange and sent to Russia. Another traitor, a 19-year-old boy from the Odessa region, was also detained near Kiev hydroelectric power plant. It's so sad that the young people, I guess, can get sucked in by online disinformation. It turns out that evidence coming out at the moment has people under 30 being the most likely to have like pro-Russian views or something, like outside in the wider world. Was it in the context of Russia, Ukraine? I can't remember. I was listening the last couple of days to someone saying that essentially disinformation can find it because older generations generally tend towards mainstream media, and people that have, you can slag off mainstream media, but they have publishing criteria and rules they have to adhere to. Whereas if you go online and get your news from anywhere, like myself, for example, I mean, you guys got trust in me that I'm not going to try and disinform you, but I could be trying to disinform you, right? And I'm not beholden to any publishing regulation, right? So I can just kind of say what I want, type thing. And people who are more used to getting their news from those kind of sources are more susceptible to being disinformed. And so you get younger people actually having more wayward views on certain things that you think, God, why do people believe that? And it's because of the places they hang out. Don't worry, guys, I'm not trying to do that. Says every disinformer under the sun. Russia knows where exactly in Ukraine the Flamingo missiles are produced, says a Firepoint technical director. And this is completely unsurprising. There have already been 2 large strikes on our workshops. I assume that they are underground. In fact, I've got another post on how they are building their facilities underground at the moment, the Ukrainians, for obvious reasons. So long power cuts have been affecting virtually all of Ukraine recently. This came yesterday before any strikes. Sumy is worse affected, as many are left without heat and water too after overnight strikes, and that was 2 nights ago. Right, moving on to Ukrainian strikes. I don't really know. Well, we know that Kremenchuk was targeted, but there's no evidence of what took place last night with regard to almost 70 drones getting through Ukrainian air defenses. Now, going on to what Ukraine achieved, first of all, we're going to look at what they achieved in November. While the world watches, Ukraine hits back at Russia's war machine, says UA Voyager here. November strikes 60 confirmed hits, which is a record. There were 2 oil or gas pumping stations, 16 electricity substations, 17 refineries, 3 oil sea terminals, 10 power plants, 3 military sites, 9 defense factories. So you can see the proportion. This is really interesting statistics here. Essentially, the hydrocarbons industry is your main target there, by point of fact that 17 refineries and 3 oil sea terminals and 2 oil and gas pumping stations are hit. But actually, when you take 16 substations with 10 power plants, then actually it is kind of maybe equally spread between the energy production and distribution, as in, you know, products like oil and refined oil products. That kind of side of the energy industry is targeted by the Ukrainians, half that, and then half energy production for, you know, their own power provision and distribution in Russia. So then military sites, only 3 military sites. I find that quite surprising, quite low. 9 defense factories. So that's pretty decent, but it's interesting how that is actually quite a fraction of the overall strikes on energy. In both senses of the word. Right, what Ukraine then did last night, looking at this drone bomber map, was massively attack up towards Voronezh and up here towards Saratov and Samara, Engels, kind of that direction maybe, and then over towards Moscow and who knows elsewhere. And in the middle, you kind of got Belgorod, but Belgorod was also hammered last night. It's not included on here. And I think it was just before this map that Belgorod was hit quite early. So anyway, I think it was a record night for airport closures around Russia, and that tells you its own story, doesn't it? So Telegram channels report a massive drone strike on Russia last night. Russian Defense Ministry claims to have shot down 287 drones. They normally claim that they shot 100% of them down. 40 of them were shot down over Moscow. Airports were closed in the area. Over 200 flights were cancelled or rerouted, including a flight of Armenia's Prime Minister Pashinyan. It actually was an alternative that was sorted out. But yeah, 287 is what the Russians claim. So you can imagine it's going to be at least that. We heard last night while it was happening, I was live with Greg Terry, and when this was all sort of developing, there were claims initially of 300, then there were claims of 400 Ukrainian drones. Who knows how many? Explosions were heard in Belgorod. I could play you those explosions, but you get the point. And then Belgorod, the power suddenly gone out, and local residents don't understand why. Meanwhile, in Voronezh, locals heard explosions. So Belgorod, evidently either a substation or a power plant was hit there, causing blackouts. And then Voronezh was mentioned. It was also loud in Russia's Smolensk region. Drones struck the Dorogobuzh thermal power plant there. According to locals, the drones attacked the Dorogobuzh thermal power plant and a mineral fertilizer and nitrogen compound plant, the PJSC Dorogobuzh. So a couple of places struck in Smolensk last night. Then you had footage from Novgorod here, where I think this the Akron plant, but I'm not 100% sure. Chemical plant. Listen to how almost positive these Russians are. They're kind of laughing. Effing take it, he says. They're all sort of laughing about that. Interesting, it goes there to that's actually that's splicing in some footage of, I think, an oil rig on the Caspian Sea there, but we'll come to that in a second. So then we have more footage here. I'm actually going to play you this. Air defense going off. Veliky Novgorod, chemical plant, Akron, produces a wide range of nitrogen and complex fertilizers. as well as industrial products. So that was attacked, and you can see there it's on fire. So definitely seems to something seems to have been hit. Yeah, pretty big explosion there. Anyway, that sort of footage is out and about. Oh my goodness, what is it? Those are drones during the night in Russia, in Veliky Novgorod. The Akron was targeted. So there is another one. I think I've accidentally missed it, of a drone flying just over someone's head. Russian Telegram channels report an attack on Akron plant, one of the largest chemical plants in Russia. Its production is used, among other things, to produce explosives. Judging from the video, the locals are excited. So yet more kind of excited locals here. So yeah, weird reactions from Russians seeing their own stuff getting blown up. A major Russian chemical producer has been hit by drones in Veliky Novgorod, 100 miles, 160 kilometers from the Estonian border. A lot of videos and photos have been posted by locals of strikes geolocated to the Akron enterprise, and you can go and look at them. This is the moment it was hit. We've just seen that. The company also has its own fleet of rolling stock for distribution, as well as making nitrogen products, fertilizers, and other compounds used in explosives. The locals are clearly not used to air defense and never expected Putin to bring the war to their city in Veliky Novgorod. Listening to that video, says Tim White, and so many videos published from Veliky Novgorod, even in the early hours of the morning, the whole city must have been woken. Some of them even seemed quite happy witnessing the strikes on one of the biggest companies in northern Russia. So yeah. And then we have some more details of this Akron. Not for the first time this place has been hit, by the way. 5 Akron plant workshops have been halted. They've halted operations there after an overnight strike. Akron PJSC is a manufacturer, as we've heard, of mineral fertilizers and industrial products, producing nitrogen and complex fertilizers, as well as industrial products. It also includes a separate structural unit that manages a fleet of rail cars, as Tim White was saying, for transporting raw materials to production facilities. The company's products include ammonium nitrate and components of which can have industrial applications in both civilian and military sectors. So there's been geolocations done, and it looks like Akron has taken one for the team and it's been hit by the Ukrainians there. And then, as mentioned, you had this video previously, or this video of the Akron site being hit on a previous video, and spliced this on the end, which looks to be from a Ukrainian HQ. That is actually, as far as I can work out, from not from Akron, but from a an oil rig that we're now going to talk about in the Caspian Sea. So Ukrainian drones hit the Akron chemical plant, 700 kilometers from Ukraine. And it had at least 5 hits, is the claim. Now, at least it appears from this image here being used by Kirilo Shevchenko from that previous bit of video footage, actually this is an oil rig in the Caspian Sea, but I don't know, that could be the Akron plant. But anyway, both places have been targeted. Ukrainian drones just scored a historic first. They've shut down Russia's massive Filanovsky oil platform in the Caspian Sea. Lukoil's key site was hit with 4+ strikes, halting oil and gas from 20 wells. 20+ wells are no longer drawing oil. The beast holds 129 million tons of oil and 30 billion cubic meters of gas. Exports via the Caspian pipeline have now been crippled. Whether that's going to annoy the Kazakhs again, I don't know. So Ukrainian forces for the first time struck the Lukoil offshore oil fields in the Caspian Sea with long-range drones located over 905 kilometers from the front line. Incredibly significant, this. So that's going to hurt Russia's ability to make money. This could have catastrophic consequences for the Russians, says Jürgen Naudet. The platform operated on one of Russia's largest deposits in the Caspian Sea, reserves of 129 million tons of oil and 30 billion cubic meters of gas. Products were being exported. So yeah, long-range drones have hit that. Ukraine has halted a Russian oil platform in the Caspian Sea. So, and 20 oil wells there. So that is a very, any facility aiding Russia's war is a legitimate target, said one SPU source. Yeah, really big news that that's been hit, and it's going to compound the Russian economic woe. We're going to return to that in a second, more formally on the economic side of things. Although it's going to be included to a degree here. This is Steve Rosenberg for the BBC in Moscow, looking at the Russian papers as he does on a daily basis. One Russian paper, he says today, says, quote, "We will not agree to a truce because we need the capitulation of Ukraine." So the Russian papers are very clear. We are not going to sign a truce with the US because we need Ukraine to completely capitulate. And that, I think, pretty much sums up the Russian approach. Meanwhile, quote, "Nearly 60% of Russian regions have a hole in their budgets of over 600 billion rubles, almost 11 times more than in 2022. The economy ain't going well." Now, sort of before we get onto the stats of the economy, just a few other things. First of all, Irish Prime Minister said the drones did not pose a threat to President Zelensky's plane. So this is when Zelensky went to Ireland. There were those drones, sizable drones that were in the air that were supposedly of military type that the Irish were witnessing, but they didn't do anything about. It should be made clear that though the Irish PM says they didn't pose a threat to the plane, as it landed safely sometime before this incident. The reason it didn't provide a threat to the plane is because the plane was ahead of schedule. So the question is, well, what would have happened had the plane been on schedule and these would have been at the trajectory, at the route of the plane on time, on the right? Well, as according, we don't know exactly who sent these and what their objectives were, but had everything been gone according to, I assume, their plan, Zelensky's plane would have been intercepted by these drones, or these drones would have been flying around that big old plane as it came into land. So the Prime Minister added that the circumstances indicate that the drones were, quote, "part of a hybrid campaign initiated by Russia against the interests of the EU and Ukraine." So this is war. This is war by Russia. You know, what's the EU going to do about that? And again, what does the US say about that? Poland has arrested an employee of Russia's Hermitage Museum. Alexander Butyagin, head of the Classical World Department, is accused by Ukraine of illegal excavations in occupied Crimea and will seek his extradition. This is something that's been happening in Crimea. The Russians have been busily excavating all sorts of historical artifacts from the peninsula and then nicking them back to Russia. The archaeologist in question here was on a European lecture tour when he was detained in Warsaw in Poland, and he's is he going to be extradited to Ukraine? I don't know. There was an assassination attempt of Timur Mindic, so the guy behind the Energoatom scandal, the corruption scandal, who fled to Israel. Apparently, according to Kolomoisky, in a courtroom, there was an assassination attempt on Mindic in Israel on November the 28th. The criminals mistook his house, though. They got the wrong house, so the attack failed. But honestly, I don't know anything else about that. Right, back to the economy. Here is a graph of, I guess in pink there, 2025, the amount of oil on the water, and previous years, 2024 in a dark blue, and the average from 2016 to 2024. What do you notice? A massive spike of oil on the water, not oil in ships on the water, which suggests that that isn't reaching ports. Why? Because nobody's buying, or not as many people are buying Russian oil, which means that that is not only clogging up ships so they can't sell other oil, they can't go back to port, refill, go and sell and do all that, but the oil they've got on board cannot be sold. So this is really disastrous for the Russians. Like, it has a massive, massive economic impact, having oil sat on the water. Not only are they less able to produce as much, we've just seen a Caspian oil rig with 20 wells halt operations, and we've got other places consistently being blitzed by the Ukrainians. But when they do get there, and then the oil terminals in Novorossiysk, now that's shut down, the Caspian Petroleum Consortium pipeline at Novorossiysk being shut down. So not only are they not producing enough, they're not filling ships enough, but the ships they have filled just get stuck and can't sell their stuff. LNG and oil prices have plummeted. The global oil supply glut is growing, which is very bad news for Russia. So here we have natural gas prices going right down there. And here we have Brent crude oil prices going right down as well. And of course, the Urals price will be sitting below that. The longer it sits, the lower the price goes. So as this oil sits on the ocean, they'll have to give greater and greater discounts until nations are like, okay, we will buy it at that, because we were going to get sanctioned for buying this stuff of you, but it's just too good to resist now. And in which case, you know, the Russians would be selling it at a loss. Now, talking about hydrocarbons and actually refined products here, petrol, whatever happened to Russia's fuel shortages? So the analysts, and it's a great question, I forgot about this. I was reporting every day petrol stations didn't have enough fuel in Russia and Crimea, all over the place. And then suddenly no one's talking about it. What happened? Well, a couple of months ago, petrol and diesel were becoming rapidly scarcer, and now it's not. So what happened? Putin, in essence, quickly realized that this could be a disaster. The Ukrainians are smashing their refineries and oil export terminals, but they're nowhere near cutting the country's fuel supply. Putin wasn't going to let this become an internal protest point, so the government ordered a complete change of priorities at the refineries. Belarus was forced into sending refined fuels into Russia. They paid Kazakhstan to refine as much as possible into petrol and diesel. Every single Russian refinery was told to produce as much petrol and diesel as it was viable at the expense of everything else. Forget the other products. Just keep producing fuel to keep the population docile, and so it began. With every refinery working in unison to produce what was demanded, within weeks the shortages vanished. However, the other products used for plastics, chemicals, fertilizer, and heating oils rapidly became in short supply. But that doesn't matter as long as the public are kept away from the boiling point and protest. That's why Ukraine must carry on eating away at every refinery and every cracking tower. Eventually, the refineries will break down and the shortages will inevitably return. Like everything in Russia, it buys time, but not for long. Interesting. Now, one of the largest mining sites in the Urals, workers have stopped receiving their salaries. Workers involved in the development of the Veliky deposit, one of the largest in Russia in terms of copper, iron, vanadium ore reserves, have complained about a 2-month delay in salaries. And here you can see them getting together and getting annoyed. In a video appeal from shift workers who are working on the construction of the enrichment plant near the city of Kushva in the Sverdlovsk region, was published on the page of the former Moscow City Duma deputy Yevgeny Stupin on Facebook on December the 5th. The management of the hiring company, the large construction holding HC Novolex, stopped paying salaries to 200 workers more than 2 months ago. The workers themselves said the employees are in a difficult situation and cannot even go home. Quote, tickets for leaving the site are not purchased, travel expenses are not compensated, daily allowances for food are not paid to workers, and compensation for salary delays is not paid. Despite the workers' indignation, the higher management ignores the appeals for salary payment. The video appeal says, according to Rosstat, as of October, the total amount of overdue salary debts in Russia reached 2.156 billion rubles, and over the past year, this amount has increased by 2.95 times. The number of complaints about salary delays and non-payments to Rostrud has jumped by 1.6 times over the year. In 11 months, the department received 26,000 appeals. And to add to that, here we got another video, another uprising in Russia. Residents of the Kursk region demand the payments Putin promised. A governor's advisor said locals should have defended their homes themselves. Local channels deleted reports about the protest, and a woman was who appealed to Putin was detained. So these guys in Kursk were promised payments, I presume, for being involved in the war and getting their places shellacked, and no one's been paid as they were promised, and now they're protesting against Putin. So, you know, you've got economic woe taking place all over Russia. You've got hydrocarbons industry getting absolutely smashed by Ukraine and by sanctions. You've got Ukraine continuing with huge waves of drones and missiles last night, and long may that continue. And there's no coincidence that was taking place last night, given the geopolitical shenanigans with the peace negotiations. And then you got people protesting they're not getting paid. As remember, if you look at the budget at the moment, they are slashing welfare and basically every other sector. Expenses have been cut big time, so they're not spending, the Russian government. So there's no stimulation for the economy, and they're cutting, and at the same time they're spending everything on the military that they possibly can. It is looking dire in Russia, and this is what Ukraine's hope is, that this the whole area collapses with the help of their missiles and drones, and with the help of the European Union and the US, fingers crossed, keeping up sanctions without giving exemptions to Slovakia and Hungary, etc., etc. And all the time trying to hold back in places like Pokrovsk, whilst exacting as much pain on the Russians as possible, as you've heard from Magyar's birds, and you know, all the claims that there are just inordinate numbers of Russian soldiers being thrown at Ukrainians to try and take Pokrovsk. And the Ukrainians is just about holding on, and they are treating the Russians at tremendous levels, but the Russians just keep coming. It's just an endless flow of human beings. So that's where we are, and it kind of all fits into what I've been saying anyway. But yeah, that is my synopsis of what is going on the front lines over the last 24 hours. Please remember to pop along to atpgeo.com/donate, and you'll come across our fundraiser for Zhiga's Poor, which is going along very nicely. Thank you very much to the help of you guys. Almost 11,000 now, so we're getting towards like closing this out at some point relatively soon, and then we can sort of jump on the back of the Christmas appeal for Car for Ukraine as well. So thank you very much for all of you insanely generous people who are helping out the 80th Air Assault Brigade there. And anyway, in the meantime, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.